How can you even diagnose a 2-year-old as a bipolar disorder? I mean, how can you diagnose anybody as a bipolar disorder if you want to look at it that way? Because there is no such thing as bipolar disorder, not from a medical standpoint. It's not like you can find a cell in a person that shows that they have bipolar disorder. It's not like they have a fever or run a temperature, like if they had a physical illness. This is a behavioral definition only. In other words, a human being sat there and made a subjective decision that this person has this so-called condition.
Today, nearly 1 million children are diagnosed as bipolar, making it more common than autism and diabetes combined. In 2007, 500,000 children and teenagers took at least one prescription for an antipsychotic, including 20,000 under the age of 6. Antipsychotic drugs, powerful chemicals designed originally for only the most seriously mentally troubled, are now a $22.8 billion industry.
If you spent days reading the newest DSM, you would be able to diagnose every human being that you ever saw. And with the diagnosis comes a treatment.
The DSM most definitely helps in the prescribing of drugs. It legitimizes the process of pulling out the prescription pad, because here is this disease entity. The disease entity is addressed with this medication.
And the DSM is in the service of making things reductionist into very simple, simplistic ways of looking at things. That makes it easier for the pharmaceutical company to create a medication for. The only thing that we've left out of that equation is the person.
And the average person is completely unaware that psychiatric diagnoses are not medical, but merely voted on behaviors. Which leads us to our next question. How do psychiatrists take these invented disorders and get people to believe they have them? According to psychiatrists at the World Health Organization, 450 million people worldwide have a mental disorder, 3 times the metropolitan populations of Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Mexico City, Mumbai, Milano, Madrid, Toronto, Washington, Athens, Melbourne, Hong Kong, Singapore, Rome, and Berlin combined. Are there really this many mentally ill? Or is this just a case of good marketing? In early 1999, the United States was confronted with news of a frightening new disease epidemic. You blush, sweat, shake, even find it hard to breathe, posters read, with the tagline, "Imagine being allergic to people." The disease was social anxiety disorder, SAD, or SAD, and it was claimed to affect about 13.3% of the American population. And to find out more, readers were instructed to contact a group called the Social Anxiety Disorder Coalition. What the public was not told was that both the coalition and the campaign were created by a public relations agency and bankrolled by a drug company. Later that year, while the campaign was making millions of people aware of this previously unknown disease, the antidepressant Paxil became the first drug approved by the FDA for the treatment of social anxiety disorder. Psychiatrists such as Jack Gorman of Columbia University and Murray Stein of the University of California at San Diego signed up as psychiatric frontmen for Paxil's ad campaign. And within 3 years, Paxil shot from 3rd place in its drug class to 1st. Paxil's product director would later boast, "Every marketer's dream is to find an unidentified or unknown market and develop it." That's what we were able to do with social anxiety disorder. Paxil's competition took notice. That same year, Pfizer got FDA approval to sell its antidepressant, Zoloft, for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. They too hired a public relations firm to create their own psychiatric front group and paid psychiatrists to spread the word about the disorder. This campaign would claim that 1 person in 13 would develop PTSD over the course of a lifetime, and this included anyone witnessing a violent act, natural disaster, or distressing event. And as with Paxil, sales of Zoloft skyrocketed.
For the psychiatric drugs, the goal is to have as many people on them as possible. So the way to do that is to convince normal people that they have some defect or mental disease or condition that requires treatment. So I mean, that's the way they do it. They hire these big marketing companies that come up with these campaigns.
We're going to tell you about your disease so that you can lead a happier, healthier life. Oh, and by the way, we have a drug too that helps to treat this disease.
This practice of selling sickness is known as disease mongering, a term defined by the late journalist Lynn Payer as trying to convince essentially well people that they are sick, or slightly sick people that they are very ill. On Madison Avenue, disease mongering is accomplished through a strategy known as condition branding, where mental illness is pitched just like cars, beer, or laundry detergent. And according to top New York branding guru Vince Parry, no therapeutic category is more accepting of condition branding than the field of anxiety and depression, where illness is rarely based on measurable physical symptoms and therefore open to conceptual definition. Parry then suggests to executives 3 principal strategies for what he called fostering the creation of psychiatric illness. The first is elevating the importance of a condition, or leading the public to believe that a minor or temporary mental problem is much worse and far more widespread than it really is. Prior to the introduction of SSRI antidepressants, depression was considered, even by psychiatrists, to affect only 100 people per million. Since then, estimates have been raised to as many as 100,000 cases per million, a 1,000-fold increase. The result is about 10% of Americans, some 27 million people, currently on antidepressants, twice as many as in 1996.
Very good marketing that all, expressions of human emotion, deep sadness and fear and anger and whatever else they happen to be, are now classified as, a major problem, a psychiatric problem, a psychological problem that needs to be dealt with drugs.
Another psychiatric illness, bipolar disorder, was also considered rare, affecting only 0.1% when it was first introduced in the DSM-3. Today, there are claims that as many as 10% of the population, 100 times the original number, have the condition. Pediatric bipolar disorder was not even listed in the DSM when Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Biederman began publishing studies claiming that mood swings in children were not normal behaviors, but in reality, mental illnesses. Biederman's disease-mongering campaign worked. In the last decade alone, the rate of children labeled with bipolar has soared 4,000%. But what parents were not told was that 25 different drug companies had underwritten Dr. Biederman's work. The extent of their influence was not revealed until a 2008 Senate investigation exposed Dr. Biederman for failing to report more than $1.6 million in pharmaceutical income. But these revelations had no effect on psychiatry. Pediatric bipolar continues to be widely accepted in the psychiatric community.
These labels are being applied to younger and younger children, which I think is really, a sad case. I'm sure I agree with any of those labels to begin with, but let alone for them to be applied universally to young kids.
This idea that childhood itself is a psychiatric disease is simply based off some completely unsubstantiated idea that got printed in the psychiatric manual, and there's no science behind it whatsoever.
Disease-mongering strategy number 2, redefining an existing condition. This tactic takes an ordinary state of mind and recasts it as a psychiatric disease that now must be treated with drugs. Case in point, the winter blues, a common mental condition related to the lack of sunlight during winter months, but redefined by psychiatrists as seasonal affective disorder, a psychiatric disease requiring psychiatric treatment. As another example, consider the changing emotions during a woman's menstruation, made over by psychiatrists as premenstrual dysphoric disorder, a mental illness discovered not in a laboratory, but in the marketing department of drug maker Eli Lilly.
When Prozac patent came up,